Hello, my name is Timothy Gager, and welcome to Virtual Fridays, Dire Literary Series. And tonight, my guest is Zach VandeZande from beautiful Vermont, and this is something that really helps me out because I am just a dog with reading bios. So here is his bio, everybody, and you can read along. Zach VandeZande is a lapsed academic living in Burlington, Vermont, although he's called DC, NC, which is North Carolina for you non-abbreviated folks, Washington and Texas home. He's also a teacher and an editor. He's the author of Apathy and Paying Rent from Loose Teeth Press in 2008 and two short story collections, Liminal Domestic Stories from 2019, and not forthcoming, the available Lesser American Boys from Mason Jar Press. And he used to know the dogs in his neighborhood, but he moved, so he only knows some of the dogs in his neighborhood. So with that, let me stop the share and turn it over to Zach.
All right, thank you so much. You're really reminding me that my website needs to be updated. So hi everyone, it's really nice to be here. It's lovely to be in my office, not doing a dumb work thing. So I'm gonna read one piece from Lesser American Boys, which is out now through Mason Jar Press, and you can get it at your local bookstore. You can get it at one of those evil corporate websites if you feel like it. And yeah, this story is called Accord. And it is, I grew up in Texas, and I spent a lot of time in Texas writing these stories. Like a lot of these stories started in Texas. And so this is a story about Rick Perry, who was governor when I first wrote the first draft of the story. But it's actually a story about my dad. And I think that maybe will help people understand, like, why is he trying to empathize with someone like Rick Perry? And I just splashed water on myself, which is a great look. Let's get into it. This story is called Accord. Rick Perry is on an elevator in the State House building in Austin, and he has to fart, but he's not alone. And he knows it will be audible and wet sounding, and of course, he's also governor. This is about a week or so after I drowned to death over at the Barton Springs pool. Maybe you saw it in a local paper, though it wasn't that big of a story. It went like this. Some college kids on mushrooms broke into the closed park at night to go for a swim. One of them isn't nearly as strong of a swimmer as she thinks. Drowning in real life isn't nearly the production people think it is. In fact, it's almost the easiest thing a body can do. It was a mental cut and paste job for the guy typing it up for the city section. Hey, presto. Rick Perry is thinking about whether or not he can get away with letting out a little controlled fart, and I am dead by drowning. He doesn't know the people in this elevator, but they all know him. It's the first day of a new Senate session. My boyfriend of a month is sitting on his couch and trying deliberately to feel a little worse than he does about my death and the fact that he intends to use it as mental/emotional leverage to drop out of school, probably for good. My twin sister is at work repeatedly writing and then deleting an email to the guy who delivers coffee and other refreshments to her company break room every week. They're dropping him as the supplier in favor of employees bringing in their own coffee, and she barely has the heart to tell him. My mother is smoking a cigarette in the backyard of my childhood home, looking back in through the kitchen window absently, and I am sort of everywhere at once. Although it's occurred to me that maybe that's not true, that maybe I'm still in that moment of slipping under the water and my subconscious brain is trying to save me from the knowledge that death is an endless nothing. I try not to dwell on it, but it's hard. I found that it helps to focus on some kind of banal and emotion-free detail going on in the world, like Rick Perry's tightly pursed anus, that physical discomfort deeply rooted in the having of a body, a thing I would not possibly feel good about imagining to distract myself from my own death, and therefore I mustn't have. It must be really happening out there in the world. It must be that I am connected to everyone in my death. Rick Perry doesn't remember me. At least, I'm not in his thoughts in any real or conscious way, but I remember him. He was speaking at a fundraising event, and I was there for extra credit in my high school government class. Our teacher wanted us to go out and get invested in politics, and like a lot of Austin kids, I was already invested. I knew Rick Perry as a man who wanted to control my body, who thought his slick shit paternal authority was all that was necessary in governance. So I listened to him talk. I got in line to shake his hand. And then when my turn came, I looked up at him with what I thought were my best big baby deer eyes, and I spat in his face. I was composing the moment, trying to be memorable and evocative. What I couldn't expect was the look of hurt, the loss of composure. I thought about it a lot while I did my community service, and then for a little while after, and then I tried not to think about it anymore. When I think of that moment now, though, mostly I'm sad about trying to be remembered. It was a thing I did a lot when I was alive. I was obsessed with being memorable. Like I would act almost as though I were composing the present in order for it to be a beautiful past. My smile would be brilliant, but not warm. I would be there, but also in the place beyond there. My boyfriend, the one on the couch, said to me right before I went swimming, he said, "You look at the world as though it's already ended." We were sitting on the hill leading down to the Barton Springs pool, and it just started raining a little bit, and it smelled like petrichor, which is the word for when it smells like it just started raining a little bit. I was in that moment of being high on mushrooms when you are feeling at once that you wish it would never end, and you're also terrified that it might not. And I knew that word right then, petrichor, though I knew also that I had never heard it before. And I said to my boyfriend, "Hasn't it?" What Rick Perry doesn't realize as he tries with an increasing amount of concentration to make it through this elevator ride without letting rip is that though, yes, his life and this moment is about him, it's also about me and about the other people on the elevator and my sister and my ex-boyfriend, and that his struggle to not fart on the elevator is a basic admission that he wants to understand and love the people around him. And that though he would say, if pressed, that mostly that kind of thing just isn't done on an elevator, meaning it's a breach of decorum, which is one of those things that he holds dear to himself when it suits him. What he's asking for from the people around him by holding back is the kind of unrequited and universal love that he can only provide for himself. What I did was I stood up and I stripped off my clothes, conscious of what I must look like, but not really self-conscious that none of my friends had seen me naked before that moment. And I walked haltingly down the hill, avoiding roots and slick mud, and leapt in. The water was cool, not cold, and I stayed under. There was just enough light to see the rough surface pelted by rain, and I thought to myself that I could go deeper, that I could get to another burdenless place, and all I would have to do was exhale. So I did. It seemed at the time like the only thing in the world to do. Rick Perry steps off of the elevator and into an empty hallway and finally lets himself release a long, plaintive fart. It's the best he's felt all day. He smiles a little at the stupidity of his life, and for a brief second, he's nearly a contemplative man. He's nearly a person I could like. I wish I hadn't spit in his face, is what I'm saying. I wish I'd had the power to show him something more. I wish I'd had the power to tell him that he is compassionate in small ways, that he wouldn't fart in an elevator, and that's a place to start. That he's trapped inside of himself, and so is everyone else, and that his being right is no more or less being right than anyone else's being right. That there's very little between me and him and everyone else except the meat and bone that contains us. Even if it isn't true. Even if what I'm seeing in him now is just me seeing it in myself as my lungs burn and my body screams out for oxygen and my brain flips that little switch, the one that's been there all along, the one that's marked, let her think she knows everything. Abolish the concept of time. This is the last moment. One last burst of purpose. Give it to her. Just give it to her. Make everything finally all right. Thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you very much. So I've got a few questions on that. So when you wrote that story, what came first? Did you think of the Rick Perry elevator incident, or did you think of the darker side of that story?
This sort of came out of an idea I had sort of been playing around with the idea of I had several stories that were doing this thing of like, how much can you vary like high concept stuff that is very possibly stupid, right, with something deep and meaningful, right? And that's sort of what I was sort of trying to mess around with I think this is the only story that ended up like making it into the final story, or into sort of like my finished stories canon, I guess. But I was really concerned with this idea of like life is all this stuff, right? And you need to be able to grapple with all this stuff in your fiction. And I was trying to think of like, well, what does it mean, right? What does it mean that like a person in an elevator, is holding in a fart? And I also made it Rick Perry because I thought it was sort of a stick in the eye, right? It started as a stick in the eye to a political figure that I did not like. And somebody asked, would I spit in his face? No, I'm a coward. I would like to say I would yell at him, but I don't think that's a worthwhile necessarily thing to do. But at the same time, it's this idea of like grappling with someone I deeply disliked, putting them in the stupidest situation I could find, and then finding a way to empathize with them. That's what I was trying to do in that story, right? And then I very quickly added the other element of this young woman who is like would be his enemy and needs empathy, right? She needs empathy and love from the people around her, and we don't think of Rick Perry that way. So that's sort of like how those two ideas sort of melded.
Okay, I'm gonna jump to the chat for some questions, and Zach, allow me to do this. I know it can be distracted when you see questions rolling in, but
yeah, sure.
So Corey asks, you combine two of my favorite things, mushrooms and farts, but how did you come up with the ghost perspective?
I mean, there are several ghosts in this story. I think I'm a very anxious person, and I'm very concerned with like, as somebody who is not only a lapsed academic, but also a lapsed religious person and a lapsed a lot of things. I'm concerned with meaning making, and I'm concerned with like what it means to like go through the world. And the only way I sort of often can grapple with that is thinking about the end, and thinking about, okay, what does it mean that lives end? And what does it mean to try and make meaning out of the lives that we have? And so I will frequently write from the point of view of ghosts, or a ghost will appear in the story for some reason, often some like nebulous freeform anxiety bound reason. And so that's really where that comes from, right? The idea of like, what does it mean to be outside of this ideology of humanity at the end, trying to make meaning of it? Well, ghosts know about that, presumably.
All right, Jason says, solid prose. Where did you get your start writing?
Well, I got my start after undergrad, and that's sort of a boring story. Where I really got my start, I'll go with that. I was living in Denton, Texas, and this is actually where I was living when the first draft of this story was written. I was living in Denton, Texas, and Denton, Texas is got UNT at it, which is the sort of the art school for Texas. And it has a really, really vibrant art community. And I got started with this group called Spiderweb Salon. And Spiderweb Salon was hosting monthly shows where they would drag all their furniture out of their house and invite everybody in. And it would be a combination of art and music and readings. And so you never knew what you were going to get. You never knew if it was going to be good or bad. It might be, a video presentation of two people eating spaghetti out of a giant bowl and pushing it in each other's face. It might be an erotic puppet show. It might be a reading. And just that creative energy, like really, really let me realize, anything is acceptable, right? If you can sell it, if you can make it work, then you can do anything with your art. And B, there are people who want to make this and want to care. It's been really heartbreaking during the pandemic to see a lot of that go away. And so I'm glad to be here tonight, obviously, in part because it's like, oh, it's not all gone. There's some, I think Cormac McCarthy, it's something along the lines of like, eventually, like all suffering in humanity will render like one single flower. That's how sad the world will be. But we're not there yet. We have things still. Anyway.
It sounds like an amazing group. I mean, erotic puppets having sex and spaghetti. But in the pregame when we were on, I was talking about the versatility of your writing, and your comment was, I have to watch it from right. I always write the same story again and again. So John asks, what's the one story you always write? And
I mean, it's really there's sort of two elements that I think are sort of like All of my stories. I think when John asked it, when it was just the three of us in the room, I said, "Sad man is sad," or something along those lines. But I think it's all rooted, especially this book, and in some ways Liminal Domestic, although Liminal Domestic is engaged with like weirder things. It's all rooted in the idea of empathy takes active work that many people aren't willing to do, and that we're always seeing past each other, not each other, right? We're always seeing the thing that is beyond the person. We're seeing the idea of who they are instead of who they really are. And so almost all of my stories are engaged with that in some way. Like, how do we actually connect? And is it even possible? And if it's not possible, is trying enough? I don't know. That's why I write whole books about it, because I have no idea.
The range of topics you cover and the moods, there's empathy and humor and tragedy. And so do you as a writer project that into your story, or are you feeling that beforehand and then it shows up on your screen?
It's a little of both. Like, I think, almost everything I write is rooted in some of that anxiety, right? Some anxiety that I'm feeling, some desire to sort of like exercise something like that. And you could hear that as EXOR or EXER. I think it's sort of both, right? I'm exercising and exorcising whenever I write. But I think that really what it is I become a version of myself on the page that I've moved beyond, right? One that is less settled and less sure and less comfortable. I lean into those feelings of like really, conflict's the wrong word, dis-ease. I lean into those feelings of dis-ease and see where that takes me, which maybe just means I should be in therapy.
So I find that interesting that with your anxiety in the outside world, you say you move to write, but you still have that anxiety. It's not like cathartic at all. But do you function better on the page or in the quote real world?
Oh, the page, 100%. Like, it feels, because it's composed, right? Like, I'm somebody who is deeply uncomfortable in just being like a thing made of meat out there in the world. And I'm sort of deeply uncomfortable with the idea of being perceived in general. So here I am in front of all of you. But on the page, you have edited yourself, right? You've edited yourself into a shape that is like the one you're proudest of. And you have sort of taken the mess of your mind, and this is the David Foster Wallace thing of like shined a light through a keyhole at precisely the right part of it. And that's much nicer than just being the big messy person. Sometimes, not all the time.
Mason Jar Press, Heather Rounds reached out to me about you, and I'm really glad that she did. You're the third Mason Jar author we've had in here, but your first book came out in 2008, and this one obviously came out this year. But then there was, between the first and the second book, there was 11 years between publications. So I always ask, what's that blank space in your resume about?
Okay, so blank space in my resume is being married to the wrong person, getting divorced, going to grad school, getting a PhD, being on the academic job market, having that go badly, and then having it go well, and then finishing the two books in that time, right? I finished both of those books. I finished Liminal Domestic between the first draft of Lesser American Boys and the one that was published. And so a lot, right? So much happened, but also not much at all. Just I lived. And I think primarily I went to school and I realized, first of all, Apathy and Paying Rent is out of print, and that is on purpose, right? It went out of print and I did not make any moves to find a new home for it or anything like that. It was written when I was 22 years old, and that little boy made some mistakes in that book. And so I think that's part of it as well. It's just like, I needed to stop and grow. Like, I was making art without purpose. And I needed to figure out what my purpose was.
So in those 11 years, married to the wrong person, graduate school, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which of those topics that you've named made it into your stories, and which did you feel hands off?
I have very rarely written about the marriage that I had. I think just because in part it's a novel's worth of stuff, and in part because I sort of respect the privacy of who I was during that time and who that other person was during that time. And I also think it's just a boring old story, right? Two people who meet too young, fall in love, and get married, and then over the course of 5 years realize that that was a really bad idea. There's not much. I mean, there's so much narrative propulsion there and meaning and et cetera like that, but it feels like that's for me. It feels like that's not for the stories.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
just don't introduce a gun into that story, because then you'd have to use it.
Right. Yeah.
As famous fiction quote. Lesser American Boys. Let's put a plug in for the new one in the title so people remember it. Lesser American Boys. Explain that title.
So I'm going to quote McCarthy again, and I apologize. I reread All the Pretty Horses this week for a work assignment. There's a line in that book where Alejandra just says, "What are men?" And it's it's sort of meant to be sort of a like a big histrionics the wrong word because it's gendered. I don't fucking mean that. A big like expressive moment of like, why is all this happening? Why are so many men so messy and terrible and awful? Including you, John Grady Cole, the person I'm talking to. And that was sort of like what this book is about. It's about the idea of like, men have messed up in a lot of ways, and that they have not really figured out how to be in the world in many ways. And I wanted to explore that, right? And do it with tenderness, not by indicting them, right? By thinking about like, who are these little boys underneath the men who are wandering around thinking they know what they're doing. And so that's sort of where the title came from. It was also sort of like a rejoinder to like great American men. Like, there's a story about Henry David Thoreau in this book, and he's just a terrible boyfriend. That's the whole the plot of the story. He's just like really bad at being in a relationship. And I was just sort of thinking about like, what's the obverse of that? And aren't all these great men also these like tiny little boys at the same time? So yeah.
What do you think men today just hold on to the right to be unevolved?
What do I think about that?
Yeah.
I think it's it's a comfort, right? It is, right? To be somebody who doesn't interrogate your emotions, or to be somebody who clings to the idea that you're always right, because to be otherwise would be to have your strength challenged. I'm sure it's very comforting. I sometimes I wish I was built that way. But I also think that it creates a situation where you're kind of a wrecking ball in the world, where you're going around doing things without like realizing or having any kind of cognizance of like the look on other people's faces while they encounter you a little bit, or what they're feeling on the inside.
So I'll give you two choices.
Yeah.
You write a book and men read it and it changes their perspective, or you write the same book and women read it and it becomes a bestseller. Which do you prefer?
Oh geez, maybe neither. The joke is I just like, I don't want to be noticed at all. Mike at Mason Jar has been a wonder, because he's like, you have to actually like get out there and do a little bit of PR. And I'm like, all right, sorry, sir. I mean, for the sake of the fact that I want to buy a house someday, definitely the latter. But I also think, it's an interesting question, because I don't have a lot of male friends, and I genuinely sort of don't have that many male role models. I know every writer I mentioned here tonight has been a man, but I apologize about that. Amber Sparks is great.
She blurbed your book, in fact.
She did blurb my book. Her book is like looking like my books are right there, and it's right there, and she's the first person who I could think of. But I don't know. I don't think this is true, but I don't feel like I'm talking to men. I feel like I'm talking to myself more than I'm talking to like the men I've known in my life, or the men around me, or men generally. So I guess that means by default, I just want that money. Give me that money.
You have so many twisted tales in your book. Are you like out in the world, like pumping gas and a thought comes to you, or eating a waffle and it'd be like, well, imagine if this waffle was a discus, or like, do you have that vision, in other words?
It tends to happen not when I am out in the world. It tends to happen when I deliberately like put myself in the chair. Like I'm a big advocate for you take your laptop with you, you go to a place where you will not be bothered for 2 hours, and you just sit, and you don't let the anxiety or the discomfort of boredom stop you and make you go home. And that's where my ideas come from. They're always born out of something that happened, right? Or some dumb thing I thought while I was pumping gas. But I don't feel inspired when I'm out in the world having a thought, right? I don't feel like, oh, that would be a good story. It's always like after my subconscious mind has chewed on it.
That makes a lot of sense to me. So you've lived, when I introduced you, I named all the states that you've lived at. Do you draw from each one of them?
I have not yet written anything that is like very Vermont. I've written a story. I'm working on a story that is about being a quote unquote flatlander, which is just being an outsider. That's what Vermont people call people who haven't lived in Vermont for 3 generations, flatlanders. But most of my stories are still sort of set, even though I haven't lived there in a decade at this point, are still set in like a Texas-y place. I think because it's a very fertile ground for thinking about the kinds of things I want to think about. It's a very politically charged environment. It's a very hot place. It's a place where people are nice, but the culture is mean. And I think that really is a fertile ground.
All right. Well, Zach, I would like to thank you for being here with us. And let me show everybody. There's the book. And there's Amber Sparks' quote
There
on
is.
the book too. So pick up this book at fine bookstores. You might have to ask for it. You can order it at bookshop.org and support the indie bookstores as well as on Amazon. Because on Amazon, when they have their Black Friday sale, I'm sure Zach's book will be like $3 and Zach will get screwed, but that's just the way it works.
The way of the world. As long as you review it afterwards, I'm happy.
All right. Well, thanks once again. And for
thank you.
Folks watching on the stream right now, the link's in the group. You can come on in and read on the open mic if you wish. Otherwise, thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to cut you guys off right now. And next week, please join us for Rusty Barnes.